All right. Hello, everybody. This is Barry, co-founder and CEO at Ivy, calling in from New York. I'm incredibly excited for our conversation today. We're here with Harrison Monarth. Harrison, hello. How are you today?
Good, thank you.
So great to have you here. So today we're going to be talking about executive presence based on your latest book by the same name and by the subtitle, How to Command Respect Like a CEO. At Ivy, our mission has always been about two things. It's getting people to unlock their full potential through learning and community. And when it comes to learning, it's all about learning about the world and better navigating it, but also learning a lot about ourselves and how we can also enhance our lives. And then above and beyond the learning, it's all about connecting with amazing individuals like you, Harrison, and all the other Ivy members who are dialing into this call to help support each other, both in our good times and in our bad times, to enhance our impact and make as big a positive change in all the organizations and people that we're associated with as possible. So there's rarely a topic that can be more relevant to helping all of us at Ivy, myself included, everyone who is a part of the organization, whether as a member or as a colleague of mine, to really enhance our executive presence. So before we get going, I really want to start with why you found this topic to be important to the extent that you've dedicated your life to this. You're one of the most sought after leadership coaches in the world. You've written 2 books on the subject. You've, I think, coached people, and you said 64 out of the Fortune 500s, everyone from director level all the way up to the CEOs of these organizations. Mm-hmm. What got you into this? Why is it important? And what is executive presence in the first place?
Okay. So I wrote the first edition of the book. The second edition just came out like a month ago. The first edition I wrote in 2009, and to be honest, turned my manuscript into my publisher, McGraw-Hill, and so we kind of kicked around a couple of titles, and they said, this is really about executive presence. And I said, that sounds right. That makes sense. And because we also looked at my work, the work I had been doing up to this point, and I was working with executives on how to communicate more effectively, get their point across, persuade people to cooperate and influence in a positive way. And so once the first edition came out, I got really interested in this topic. I'm like, executive presence, it is an important thing. And a lot of people are, I'm getting questions about, one of the things that I've heard was the head of global talent management at the time for Merck Pharmaceuticals called and said, we've identified several leaders, executives that need to work on their executive presence. And then she paused and she said, but what is it? And, so we both had a chuckle about that. And then I said, well, here's my definition of it. And here's what I've been helping people with, right? And so it was one of those things that you know it when you see it, right? People had a hard time really qualifying what is executive presence. So I got very interested in it. And so over the past 10 years, I've completely revised and updated Executive Presence, the book, and packed it with lots of research from neuroscience, from psychology, and tons of case studies. So as you mentioned, over the past 15 years, I've worked with over 60 Fortune 500 CEOs directly, and then thousands of senior leaders globally. Companies like Deloitte, P&G, GM, PepsiCo, HP, you name it, helping people from the director level up to the CEO level have more positive influence. And you asked, what is executive presence? So I would say, and a quick description would be, to me, executive presence is all about having a positive influence and impact on people, having an impact. And when you do that, you engage people, you inspire people, it's a combination, sort of a fluid combination of skills, behaviors, traits, temperament, judgment, that all add up to a personal power that then draws people to you, that makes people want to follow you, that gives you credibility, that makes people want to root for you and basically, buy in to your ideas. So that's what executive presence is on a sort of more global scale. Right, and then we can talk about, obviously, what are some of the individual components, right? What are those specific traits that make up executive presence? And so I captured those. I captured 17 different skills, behaviors, traits in my book that really anyone can learn. Anyone can pick up. Should I keep talking?
Yeah, this is perfect. And I think that's a perfect segue into really like taking that definition you provided, which is a very positive one, right? How do you have a bigger positive impact on people through your presence, right? Your ability to, you know, get them to follow you, get them to achieve great things.
Mm-hmm.
So I love that. And you mentioned 17 points in the book. So
yeah.
Would love for you to just actually share what are those points.
Yeah.
And then we will select and jump between them to really figure out what can our members do on each of those points to, you know, enhance their executive presence wherever, whatever level they're at, but also what are the key pitfalls they should avoid with those 17 points in mind.
Absolutely. So before I go into the specific individual components of executive presence, let me say a couple more things. We all have an executive presence profile. So it's not like you either have it or you don't have it, right? It's we have certain components, and we're strong in some areas, we're not so strong in others. So when you hear what they are, you might already be thinking, oh yeah, that I'm told I'm pretty good at this, but here I know I need to work on that, right? So we have a profile. The other thing is executive presence can shift, meaning I might have, so one of the components of executive presence is confidence, right? Projecting confidence. Well, if I come into an office and I'm meeting my new colleagues and peers, right? And I have, say I'm a good conversationalist, I project confidence, you know, I'm witty, I seem smart, right? I know what I'm talking about. I, you know, can talk about the work and I can talk about my expertise. But then the moment I get in front of a more senior level audience, right? The board, you know, my boss, right? Or anybody more senior, I start stammering, I can't think straight, I get nervous, I fall apart under the pressure, and now all of a sudden, I don't have so much executive presence, right? It goes right out the window. So it can absolutely shift depending on the context. The other thing that's important to know is that executive presence, some components are more important in initial encounters and some more over time. So let me talk about what some of these components are, right? So I mentioned projected confidence. That's certainly one of them. The ability to speak truth to power, meaning standing up for your ideas, even to a more senior level executive, somebody of a higher status, right? Managing up is part of executive presence. The ability to read your audience, especially your bosses, right? And manage up effectively. Acting decisively, being decisive and acting that way. Being able to articulate messages in a clear, convincing and appealing way. Presenting your ideas in a simple way. Interpersonal integrity. What do I mean by that? Interpersonal integrity. Remembering a conversation you had with somebody 3 months ago, so that they actually feel like, oh my gosh, this person was listening to me. You know? Being inclusive. Acknowledging people's contributions, right? Having the human touch, being caring. Intellect and expertise are part of executive presence, right? People want to know that they're dealing with somebody who's strong, right? Having impressive intellect, having deep knowledge in areas, you know, your domain, being thoughtful, being insightful, being an excellent decision maker, demonstrating emotional intelligence, and with that, being calm under pressure. Being able to recognize your emotions and then being calm under pressure. So in other words, being able to regulate your emotions in very stressful situations, because that's really often where, you know, the rubber meets the road, so to speak. Like if you're well prepared, you come across as knowledgeable and as confident, but then if there's a pressure situation where you need to perform, even after a presentation, right, during Q&As, somebody asks a very pointed question, somebody challenges your ideas, it's tough not to feel personally affected or attacked, right? And then if you actually get super emotional and perhaps angry or defensive, it basically negates all the good work you've done up to that point, you know, because people feel like, oh, he or she can't hold up under the pressure. So in my book, in chapter 3 of the book, the entire chapter is about how to manage and regulate your emotions under pressure, right? So I give 5 different emotion regulation strategies. In fact, one of the 5, I say, do not ever use it under any circumstances, right? So, and by the way, that one is, I'll tell you what that is suppressing your emotions, right? So the moment we start suppressing our emotions, we actually get even more anxious, and the other person feels it, and it makes them anxious as well. So there's neuroscience research behind that. A couple of other components of executive presence: mastering difficult conversations. Now, this could be anything from giving somebody performance feedback, or even just letting somebody know that, hey, you hurt my feelings with this comment, or I think you just took credit for my idea that I had, right? So why are you doing that, right? And how do we fix this? You know, holding people accountable. So I work with lots of senior executives that have teams that are very, you know, top performers, type A personalities. And if you can't hold people accountable to not just results, but holding people accountable to the right behaviors, meaning, you know, collaborative behaviors, working as a team, having each other's back, supporting one another, right? There are people that very often they like to work in silos, or they like to be mavericks, and really just the glory is all about them. Being able to hold people accountable for the right behaviors, even interrupting others in meetings, right? Not letting people finish, or trying to dominate a meeting. Those are all things that you have to be able to hold people accountable. And so there are steps to do this the right way versus just trying to punish or letting them get away with it. Because in so many instances, I've also seen where, you know, managers very often sort of make a deal with the devil, right? They feel like, well, this person is, you know, super, you know, they bring in a lot of money, they, you know, they have resources, they have specialized knowledge. If we lose that person, we can't get anyone else with that type of knowledge, or they're afraid the person will go to a competitor. So, you know, they're hedging their bets, and so they allow toxic behaviors to exist and to infect everybody else, which is horrible, right? So the ability to hold somebody accountable and then draw the consequences if necessary is not easy. So I've coached a lot of leaders on that ability. And so we basically give people a 5-step process on how to effectively hold people accountable. So political savvy is another one that's critically important, right? I ask people sometimes, do you want to be a sort of bit of a trick question, right? Do you want to be a successful leader? Or do you want to be an effective leader? And then they're hemming and hawing like, well, wasn't this both the same thing? Like if I'm effective, wouldn't I automatically Nebraska that showed that successful leaders, people that are rapidly promoted in their organizations, engage in entirely different behaviors as effective leaders. These are people who have employees that are satisfied and engaged and do good work. Their organizational units are performing well. The company's doing well. And so when they looked at the two different types of behaviors of the successful leaders and the effective leaders, they found that successful leaders were basically spending most of their time networking, politicking, socializing, creating relationships, whereas the effective leaders spend most of their time getting people to cooperate, managing conflict, communicating frequently, right? And so they've also found that in this big sample, they followed 457 managers around over several years, 4 years. And they found that only 10% of them are both successful and effective, right? And so what I want to help with my book, as well as in my coaching with leaders and emerging leaders, is you can be both. You can be both effective and successful. And sometimes I hear, and you've probably heard that phrase too, Eric, my work should just speak for itself, right? And it's a very sort of innocent, naive statement, right? Because no, your work does not speak for itself. You have to speak for it. Why? Because there are lots of shiny objects that are trying to get the attention of your senior, you know, your more senior bosses. And so you not only do you have to do good work, but you have to be able to speak for it. You have to be able to create the relationships. You have to be able to promote yourself in an elegant way, not in a braggadocious way. And so political savvy is critical, especially important for people that are naturally more introverted, that don't necessarily get a kick out of crowds and engaging with other people. And so they need, there's a bit more effort involved, but it's not necessarily more difficult once you know what some of those steps are, right? So I'm going to take a break.
Thank you. That's I'm incredibly hungry to dive into these. So what I'm going to do, and given the time constraints that we have, is I'm going to pick a few of these to go deeper. And all of our members who are listening, the latter half of the conversation is going to be all about their questions. So if anybody has questions or they want to dive into any area that we don't fully cover in the first part of the call, please, at the bottom of your screen, in the middle, there's a box there called Q&A. So please tap in your questions there, and I'm going to get through all the questions that you post as best I can. So Harrison, I just want to like start with the first one you mentioned, actually, projecting confidence, right? What are the key ingredients of doing that? Very practical next steps, right? Some of us might think we're good at this. Some of us think that we can be a lot better. But what are the key components and what are the biggest pitfalls? And actually, you already started giving an example of, oh, it's all good if you're confident, but there's junior people around, or you gave a great presentation. But what happens when more senior people are around, or they put you on the spot in the Q&A, and that just completely ask you something that has you completely phased. Projecting confidence, what are the key ingredients?
Yes, so projected confidence, meaning calmness, composure, sense of self, self-control, demonstrating emotional intelligence. Somebody who's perhaps nervous, but outwardly calm, having elegance, dignity, style, somebody who presents themselves with a sense of authority. Those are components of confidence, right? Projecting confidence. Now, you just said it. And really, I think most of us know when we feel confident and when we're not, right? So when we're not, we typically feel, there could be all kinds of reasons why we're not confident. Either I'm going into a meeting and I'm not really prepared, right? And I know that I'm not going to be able to answer those questions, and maybe there's a legitimate reason. Maybe I just don't have the info. Then I need to be able to say that with confidence and say, I haven't had a chance to look into this yet. We don't have the data yet, but I will get it to you as quickly as possible. But if you should have, right, it's just a matter of you didn't prepare, then it's very easy to sort of spiral out of control and feel bad about it and feel, sheepish, or feel like, man, I screwed up. And, you start having this narrative. They're going to hate me. They're evaluating me negatively, right? So, but how do we develop confidence? There are different ways of developing confidence. One of them is shore up your competence. In other words, be really good at something, whatever that is. And that alone can already boost your confidence, right? That's one. Another one to boost your confidence is to, and this sounds maybe a little counterintuitive, is to act with confidence. I had one leader that came out, we had a group session, and he was sitting behind, this was in Singapore, and these were Hewlett-Packard, people from different parts of the world. And I had him do a quick exercise. So I had him come out. I said, sure, come on out. And he started walking out, and so he was in his late 30s, and he started walking, shuffling like an 80-year-old man. And I said, got his name, Shamu. Shamu, would you go back to your seat, please, and come out as if you had confidence, right? And so he's looked up and he smiled and he walked back to his seat, and he came out walking like, James Bond all of a sudden. And everybody was just erupting in applause because it was a very simple behavior, simply because he focused on what would a confident person actually look like. Sometimes people ask me, I want to become more confident. How do I do it? And then throughout a workshop, I go, you said earlier you wanted to become more confident. You haven't raised your hand once. To become more confident, you have to act with confidence, which means putting yourself out there. Raise your hand, say something, contribute. It doesn't just happen all of a sudden. You have to act that way. And every time you practice something as simple as speaking up, I mean, you know this, you're going to get a little better every single time, right? So when you first started this, you probably didn't have the same level of comfort and competence that you have now. So we have to keep doing those things.
Love it. So both enhance your competence, but also act it out. So don't focus on it, make it. So there was a couple of other qualities and components you mentioned that relate directly to this point. So I'd love to quickly cover them in turn. One is like that being calm under pressure. You mentioned 5 emotional regulation strategies. What should people do and not do when their confidence is shaken for legitimate reasons, right? Like they're under a very intense situation.
Yeah.
Those situations you mentioned, being able to stay calm is a key component of having that executive confidence. What are those specific strategies for staying calm, especially when things go off the rails?
To manage your emotions, sure. So one of them is called labeling, and that's directly from from neuroscience. Labeling an emotion as it's happening. So in other words, if I am feeling nervous, or let's say I feel attacked, say I'm feeling attacked in a meeting or somebody's, having a sharp tone, by simply saying to yourself, okay, right now I feel put on the spot, I feel humiliated, or I feel angry that the person's attacking me. So according to the research, by simply labeling what you're feeling right now, your limbic system, the emotional response is going to be tamped down. So it's less hot. Now they've tested this, right? So they had two groups that were deathly afraid of spiders. And so they hooked them both up to these, the sensors, right, that measure stress levels. And so one group was told, do nothing, just let it happen, right? Let this big fat, tarantula crawl right over your hand. The other group was told, say what you're feeling, right? So the group that actually said out loud things like, okay, this big fat hairy spider is crawling over my hand and it's disgusting, it tickles, right? They showed a far lower stress response than the people that basically just let it happen, right? So labeling the emotion has been shown to have a tremendous effect. Another powerful way is to, and that's probably one of the most powerful ways to regulate your emotions, is to reframe the situation. Something called cognitive reappraisal. By simply looking at a situation from a different perspective, a just as plausible perspective. In other words, let's say, a typical thing that might happen, you walk in, for CEOs, it's walking into the boardroom and seeing the board of directors, a hostile board of directors staring them down, right? Or investors, right, that want to know what's happening, why aren't we growing? One of the things that, rather than saying they're attacking me or they don't like me or they feel like I'm inadequate, I'm not delivering, that's not helpful, because that's just going to drive your stress level up. And the moment your stress level is up, the moment your amygdala, the sort of emotional processing center in your brain, is overheating, so to speak, your executive functioning, your reasoning, your problem solving, your analytic thinking is all interrupted, right? Because it's all about survival at that point. Well, how smart do you think you're going to be? How useful do you think you're going to be? Not very. So by now reframing the situation and saying, hey, look, Barrick has a lot of money in this, and so of course he's going to be concerned about this, so he wants some answers. I don't blame him, right? And then listen, is it going to solve your problems? No, you're still going to have to deliver, you're still going to have to communicate, right, and give some good answers. But what it does help you is regulate your emotion to the point where you can think creatively or where you can think clearly and give succinct answers, rather than, because you're not thinking straight, you're rambling or you're being evasive inadvertently, right? So those are a couple of really powerful strategies.
Okay, I love both of those are really, really powerful. So thank you for that. Another thing around confidence, we can't help ourselves, right? We want to see the deeper substance in each person. We want to give them their due, but oftentimes, you mentioned the amygdala, a lot of our initial reactions to people is this like reptilian brain. It's like the emotional response we have to something. So sometimes, and one of our members, Edward, just asked a similar question to this I was getting to as well, which is like those slightly more superficial things that still play an important role. So people's physical presence, physical appearance, body language, facial expressions, as well as in our conversation earlier, you mentioned also like there's just how you appear, but also like even the degree of the word you use, seductiveness of like how people come across.
Yeah.
So if we were to group all those together in terms of how we should appear and project ourselves, what are key things to strive for and what are things to absolutely avoid when it comes to more like the surface level way that we come across?
Okay. So, I mean, we all, people generally have a good sense of how to, groom and how to dress if they are in a certain environment, right? And in a certain ecosystem. I mean, listen, managers at Google dress differently or show up differently than managers at General Motors, right? General Motors, it's all carpeted floors and oil paintings. Google, ping pong tables and scooters, right? Hoodies. And so it's truly these microcultures. So you kind of get a sense of, and I would say, look at how the leaders around you, people that are highly respected, people that you admire, how do they dress? How do they come across, right? So I think that's one thing that can help you, right? Just to see what's appropriate. How do we dress around you? And then people sometimes ask about individuality. Well, how can I be more? I like wearing red socks. I like wearing a lot of jewelry, or I like tattoos, right? And I say, okay, I think that's fine as long as you can manage that within the culture somehow, right? Because it's just, a certain culture may not tolerate, let's say, piercings and tattoos. And I think a lot of companies are just becoming a lot more flexible because they realize the true value of the person, and that it's not necessarily about, do you have tattoos or do you have piercings, or is your hair growing out or bright red or whatever it is. So I think you just have to handle that within the culture. And Goldman Sachs, I think, for the longest time, right, was all about suits and ties, shirt and tie. They've become very relaxed. I think analysts can now meet in polo shirts. They're much more relaxed now, can meet with clients. But so what's important and what to look out for here is, I want to give a quick example of a client. I work with a huge health insurance company, and they're one of their senior general counsels, got 360 feedback that he is sloppy. Let's just call it what it is. Sloppy, doesn't come across well, and just comes as unkempt. And so I had to share that feedback. Very unpleasant feedback to give, right? It's almost equally unpleasant to give it as to just to receive it, right? Just tell somebody, hey, people think you're literally a hot mess. That's what some people have said, right? So he was deeply affected. He was hurt. He said, well, you know what? I have a personal shopper at Bloomingdale's. I have my shirts starched, and those things. And so I said, so why do you think that perception exists? Why do you think that's happening? He said, well, it's typically hot at the office, and so yes, I do sweat quite a bit. And I said, well, what do you think are some things that you could do to change that perception? Because do you want to change the perception? Absolutely, I do. Okay. So, but what was happening too is, because of people's perception that he is unkempt or sloppy, it actually put his communication into a different context as well. And so let me give you an example. So what other people were saying is that, look, in meetings, he advocates for one thing at the beginning of a meeting, and 30 minutes later, he's completely on the other side of that. And we're all like, what just happened? He was just arguing his point forward, now he's against it, right? And so people think he's all over the place and sloppy in his communication. So when I mentioned it to him, he said, well, yes, in those meetings, when people bring me new information, of course I'm going to change my position, and I'm going to basically argue against something I might have been for. And I said, so what do you think might be a better way to, or a way to avoid this sort of perception? And what he came to, the conclusion he came to is, well, maybe letting people in on the thought process, on how I got to that. Right? Because otherwise, truly, our appearance can give people all kinds of signals, right? That we don't care, that that things don't matter, we don't pay attention to detail. Anyway, it does matter in the big scheme of things. People think that appearance really tells you so many other things, not just your fashion sense, obviously, right? So.
Got it. That's excellent. And we've got a lot of questions coming in. So I've got two more before we switch over to the audience.
Okay.
You mentioned, I'm going to group a few of these components together. And you were just alluding, you had to have a difficult conversation that you just mentioned, right?
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about that. Mastering difficult conversations, but also in the context of also holding people accountable. Like when you have to interrupt somebody, how do you do it with grace? So both in terms of like, when you're having to deliver an important message from your side, from let's say you're the starting move, but also when you're in a situation where you have to be the person who plays a decisive role, managing up or down in delivering difficult messages. What are key ways to approach that? And then very practically, like certain phrases to use or avoid, any practical tips when it comes to having difficult conversations?
So, right, I want to pick up on something else you just said. You talk about interrupting, right? Now, we all either interrupt or get interrupted. It's perfectly normal, right? We don't just, somebody stops talking and then we start talking and the other way around, right? It's not that neat, ever. So one thing I think that is useful and maybe a takeaway for everyone is understanding the cost of both interrupting and being interrupted. So research has shown that if we are being interrupted by someone, successfully. In other words, if somebody's successful in interrupting us and sort of taking the floor from us, so to speak, right? It actually lowers our status in other people's minds, and it raises their status. So if you're interrupting somebody successfully, all of a sudden your status goes up in everybody else's eyes, and the person that's being interrupted, their status goes down, right? Now, you're trading something in for your status that you just gained for interrupting, and that's likability. People like the interrupter a little bit less. In the great unfairness when it comes to the genders, women that interrupt men are liked even less than men that interrupt. Now, leaders that interrupt people below them, they incur no such cost, right? And in fact, if you are trying to escalate or trying to, with your leader or with someone that is a higher rank of you than you, and you're trying to stay in the conversation basically and try to interrupt that person, you get no points for that. Your status doesn't drop, but you're also not getting any points. In fact, if you're trying to overpower that person, people just think you're crazy, right? So the best thing to do is just let that happen, right? But so there's a cost to both letting somebody interrupt you. So you asked me, what are some specific phrases we can use, right? I would say be polite, but be very firm, right? Somebody's trying to interrupt you, say, excuse me, Barrett, can I just finish my thought? You're next, right? And stick with that. Don't let somebody else take it away from you, right? All right, that's on the interrupting, because that happens all the time. As far as holding difficult conversations, a couple of things that are very important to keep in mind here is, number one, they're typically associated with difficult is synonymous with emotional, right? So we feel emotional about a conversation like that. So if we want to have that conversation because our emotions are driving us to it, that's already a potentially bad sign, because that means you're going into it already emotionally fired up. And anytime you bring too much emotion into a conversation, right, it can potentially go off the rails, because now we're not thinking clearly, we're not really focusing on the issue. Perhaps we are letting our emotions do the talking. So really, perhaps waiting for a better time to have that conversation, right? And then focusing in on the issue, trying not to attack the person, but really talking about the issue and keeping everybody focused on what is the outcome? What do we want to achieve with this conversation? That's something that we should align on as well. A conversation that's typically had in an organization that is difficult is, again, holding people accountable, like I said earlier, and there are basically a series of steps that should take place in order to effectively hold somebody accountable. Number one, to be very clear on what the expectations are, right, from each other. What are my expectations for you? What are your expectations for me? Once we're aligned on that, again, fewer misunderstandings, right? The next step after that is, can you actually do that? What is your motivation to do that thing? And are you able to do it? Do you have the resources, the capabilities to do that? Again, I need to be very clear in that. Otherwise, I'm setting expectations that you may not even be able to fulfill. But because maybe I'm in a higher, position, you may be afraid to speak up. So I need to be very clear that you actually have the capabilities to do this. The next step is measuring. How do we measure success, right? If a project is supposed to take a month, I'm not going to wait 1 month to check in with you. I might check in with you on a weekly basis, right? Just to make sure we're on track. And if we're not, I can help you get back on track. The next step, so to speak, is giving feedback, allowing each other to basically, hey, here's how it's going. I need some help. What's working, what's not working, how can I help? Or giving feedback on, don't like the way it's going, how can we put it back on track? And then finally, if you don't get results, I often ask leaders, think about when you didn't get the results you wanted, where are you to blame, right? And then very often it's like, well, I didn't get enough feedback, or really we didn't set any measurements in terms of success, right? Or the expectations probably weren't clear. I should have double checked in terms of the expectations, right? So being able to pull the trigger and say, okay, we keep having an issue here. Maybe we need to reassign somebody, or we need to coach somebody, mentor somebody, give them additional training, right? But if you keep a framework in mind, a difficult conversation, such as holding somebody accountable, can be a lot easier.
Okay, I love that. So this formula actually is incredibly powerful, and I was thinking of dozens of situations, where I have been effective or not, was based on just to recap there, really focusing on, yeah, it's a difficult conversation, but start with like, what's the goal? What are we trying to do in the first place? What's the big picture? And then within those goals, what are the expectations of you and me, right? And then with regards to your expectations, are you well placed to achieve them? Like, do you have what it takes, or is anything blocking?
Right.
And then how do we measure it? How do we give each other feedback? It almost completely, objectivizes the situation versus a very subjective, like, I see it this way and it's my way or the highway. Instead, you're talking about this is just a bigger picture. So I think that's fantastic. The last thing I want to ask before we go into the audience questions, and this has been excellent so far, is the point you made about effective leadership versus, like political savvy leadership. Because I would, based on anecdotal evidence, but also having met thousands and thousands of Ivy members or across all of our cities, I have no doubt a vast majority are effective leaders. However, even statistically, and I'm sure you have the best stats, like the difference between the 0.1% of the top CEOs versus everybody, there's like massive differences, even if you are at the top on, based on like, how close you are to the top. So that political savvy, assuming you're already effective at what you're supposed to do, is a key thing. And I want to make sure our members really understand the key components of, assume you're great at your work and you're actually display a lot of these components. But just like acting with confidence, like making a point of it, acting with political savvy, knowing that you're in a human organization with human decision makers, what are the key things that you need to keep in mind to make sure that you're not just an effective leader, but you're one that's going to rise all the way to the top?
I'm going to give you a 30-second, 45-second quick case study. Yesterday, I was on the phone. I was gathering 360 feedback on a president of a holding company that I'm coaching. And some of the feedback that he's gotten, and I spoke to the CEO, and some of the feedback he's getting is that he's basically a 9-to-5 kind of guy. Very successful, brilliant, super smart, math genius, right? Super analytical, driven, great results for his division of the company. And people are saying, though, but he's such a family man. He wants to be home by 5 o'clock. He doesn't go on employee outings. He doesn't travel when he should be really seeing customers, right? And so he tries to delegate it to his team. Just doesn't interact, doesn't really engage with the outside world. He needs to get out more. He needs to just interact and build those relationships. So I asked the CEO, I said, if he doesn't do that, he's super successful, he's smart and all that, but what are some negative repercussions if he doesn't do that? And the CEO initially said, well, he's certainly on a short list to be one of my successors, right? And when I said, what won't happen if he doesn't develop this sort of, the ability to build relationships, to network, to reach out, to see people, even if it's uncomfortable and it takes time away from the family? The CEO said, well, he certainly won't get my job, right? He said, because I don't like to travel that much either, but I have to be traveling all the time. I got to go out there, see customers. I have to see stakeholders. I have to go meet people. I have to shake hands. I have to let people know that I care, and I need to have personal conversations with them so I can actually know really what's going on. So without that ability to be out there, network, create relationships, you're just not going to get there.
Got it. So whatever it takes to, whether you like it or not,
yes,
you're in a human organization. To get ahead, you have to be
I would say build relationships, reach out to people, grab them for coffee, offer to mentor someone, share resources with people, and just, go to lunch. Anybody knows how to eat and drink a cup of coffee, right? Just bring somebody along, right? And start having those conversations.
Right. So I think for a lot of people, especially if they're super driven and let's say working also nonstop, sometimes the reason they avoid some of that is because there's no time. I got to get work done. What I'm hearing you say is those things that don't feel directly like work could actually be absolutely critical to you getting ahead because it's deepening a relationship, and that's what gives you, I guess, the social capital to keep rising.
Barrick, and our to-do list never shrinks. We can barely make a dent into the things we all have to do. And so you could work on your to-do list all your life and never build any relationships, and that'll be very detrimental to your career. You have to carve out time to and plus not just for future career opportunities, but to gain new knowledge, right? To create some insights you didn't have before, to learn how to do certain things you didn't do, to broaden your perspectives.
Okay, excellent. Thank you so much, Harrison. I'm going to now call on our members to ask questions. So I will mention your name, and then I'm going to tune you in so you can ask the question directly. The first question came from Dr. Crystal Eisenhower. So Krista, I'm just gonna tune you in here. If you could unmute yourself and ask the question, that'd be great.
Great, thank you. Can you hear me?
Loud and clear.
Yes.
So one of the things that I'm always very interested in is how men and women are perceived differently in the same environment. And my question really revolves around how men and women delivering the same message are interpreted completely differently. And I'm interested in your thoughts on how women can project an executive presence more effectively, knowing that we can't go into a boardroom and behave exactly the way a man does and get the same response that they get.
Mm-hmm. So first of all, you're absolutely right? I mean, gender bias exists, stereotyping exists. People, let's say men bring their personal views about women and how they interact with women outside of work. They bring them to work, and that affects how they behave toward women, how they were raised. All these things matter. But in terms of what is something more general that I can recommend, the female leaders that I coach, and the most successful ones, they're not afraid to be called the B word. They're not afraid to be seen as aggressive. And because there's a difference between coming across as assertive and as aggressive. And often assertive female leaders are perceived as aggressive, right, by male leaders. When a man pounds his fist on the table, it's seen as leader-like and just strong. A woman doing the same thing, right, is seen as aggressive. So I would say, listen, know your stuff, be super well prepared, stand up for your ideas, and always be measured in your responses. That doesn't mean that you can't show frustration and anger sometimes where appropriate, but realizing that stereotype exists, realize also that the tide is turning, right? I mean, times are shifting in the right direction, but at the same time, deliver results, be confident, participate, raise your hand, build relationships. The more you do that, the less you really have to worry about these stereotypes. That you have, substance, and you have style, and you can deliver the goods.
Thank you. If I may, just one little follow-on point. Some of the most challenging responses I get in professional settings is from the other women in the room.
Sure.
I tend to relate well with the male side of the room, but the female side of the room, that's where I tend to have the more aggressive, more negative interactions.
And there's competitiveness at play as well. But listen, I mean, again, well prepared, being a diplomat, showing people that you have their best interest at heart. Those can all be things that can be very helpful and because there are lots of successful female leaders, right? And they're deploying these things.
Thank you so much, Harrison. Thank you, Crystal, for the great question. I'm going to go next to Vanessa, please. Vanessa, if you'd like to unmute and ask your question.
Yes, thank you. I was interested to know if you had an example of somebody that you thought had a tremendous executive presence and why you thought that person was an example of executive presence.
Perhaps a public example. I mean, Virginia Rometty of IBM is a tremendous example to me of executive presence. She has she's got both the skills, delivering results, and a passion. So when you see her presenting, for instance, right, you see her at a conference or in meetings, it's just a joy. There is a positivity and a joy and a relaxed confidence, but just really energy. And energy is something that is so important, right? A positive energy that we bring to meetings, to conversations that can have, listen, again, we have a profile, right? We're not great at all things, but if we can bring a positive energy into something, passion, and we know our stuff and we deliver results, even if you just look at those 4 or 5 things, your executive presence quotient can go up, dramatically. So I think looking at people that you admire, right? You look at people out there and go, I admire this person. You may not even know why, right? Until you really reflect and identify some of those traits. I really like the way she explains things so simply, or I like the way, she just put somebody in their place and they're smiling. So there are different ways but energy, positive energy is a tremendous booster of executive presence.
Thank you so much, Harrison. Thank you, Vanessa, for the great question. We're going to go next to Max, please. Max, can you hear us?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep. It's echoing a little bit, but go ahead.
I had a really simple question. I'm a young executive, and I found that sometimes my age can be a hindrance. I was wondering if you had any advice on overcoming that.
You said you're a young executive and age can be a bit of a hindrance, a limitation?
Correct.
Jump into a time machine? Listen, I mean, I get that. I had a breakfast with a young manager this morning, and 25. What can you do? I mean, I can give you, makeup helps, right? And I'm not kidding. I mean, just, makeup can make someone appear a little older, but there's also a certain demeanor, right? A gravitas, a certain weight to your words and to your style that, yes, initially somebody looks at you and might say, oh, she's very young. Wonder how experienced she is or how seriously, that person can be taken, really man or woman. But then if you show up with, again, your stuff, you're decisive, right? You have the confidence, pretty quickly, that stuff falls into the background and I'm really focusing on your substance, right? But it's that energy level. But the moment, right? And I've seen this, I was in San Francisco doing a workshop for a tech startup, and the HR leader, super positive, attractive, young, bubbly, because she was that behavior has made her very popular and successful. And I told her, I said, look, it's so infectious and it's almost like she's such a joy to have around, and she is, people love her, but it also made her look more immature when she presented anything, right? Any topic at all in front of her group, it made her look a little less mature. Her pitch went up when she was presenting. Everything was accompanied by a big smile and by sort of a cheerful attitude. And people notice that and just makes you look a little bit younger, right? But if you say things with the right amount of sort of, energy and seriousness where appropriate, and not everything's accompanied with a smile and an upswing at the end of each sentence, yeah, that can absolutely make you seem more powerful. I don't know, listen, almost everybody on this planet has seen Game of Thrones. And one of the things that I've always been sort of intrigued by is there was a little girl, and I don't know how old she was in the show, right? 10 years, 11 years, 12 years old, but she was leading this group of big, burly men, right? Every time she spoke up, everybody's listening to her and bowing to her, right? Because she said it was she was 8 or 10, right? And she said it with such confidence and seriousness that it might as well have been a 50-year-old general saying the same thing. So yeah, you can absolutely mitigate any perception of being too young with your substance and a gravitas, a weight to you.
Thank you, Harrison. Thank you, Max.
You know what I'm talking about, by the way, with that girl? You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah. Great actress. Thank you, Max. All right. On behalf of a member of ours who's at a Loud Trading desk, asked me to ask this question to you directly. He asked, I work for a small company, 40 people and 4 offices in different countries. The founder is very hands-off, but at the same time, very controlling about the culture and also perhaps insecure about his leadership and image. Do you have suggestions on how to enhance this leadership in an environment like that when you're in middle management?
To enhance his leadership?
He actually said how to exert leadership. I assume exert, I think he means exert leadership, enhance the level of leadership across the board, maybe managing up and also across the board.
Okay, so he's talking about this leader being a certain way, and he wants to know, how do I enhance my own leadership or assert my own leadership?
Right.
Listen, so if the culture is a certain way, right? Each little, organizational culture, each organization, even if there's only 3 people working together in an office, they're developing a culture, right? How they do things, what's accepted, what's not, what are the norms, how do you behave? And if you're working in an organization where the culture is perhaps a little bit counter to what you think is ideal, let's use, for example, we all know feedback is important, right? Feedback is important to improve, to develop, to grow. But let's say you work in an organization where people are afraid of feedback or they don't like to give feedback. Well, how is anybody supposed to grow? Well, you can create your own little microculture with your own team and say, guys, we're going to give each other feedback, right? How do we do that? Because that in itself is a bit of a, can be an explosive topic, right? People very sensitive, or feedback can hurt feelings and can be seen as threatening. The feedback provider feels threatened and is uncomfortable. It just becomes a really weird soup of emotions. Well, but if you decide together, how do we give each other feedback? How do we grow? Well, let's just tell each other, okay, great, when? Right after something, right after a meeting. How did that go? What could I have done better, right? So I would say find ways to influence, right, the culture just right around you with your team, your colleagues, and then that can hopefully then catch on. And obviously it's even better if you can get other senior leaders, more senior leaders to adopt these behaviors. So, but yeah, you got to work on your own style, but if you have a culture that's not conducive to this, see how you can affect the culture by having a positive influence on others.
Yeah, and just to add to that from my personal experience, it's actually incredible how valuable feedback is from people who might be lower in level of seniority, but who in the appropriate moment on a one-on-one basis gives the feedback on, hey, here are some things I noticed that you could be doing better, because most people are too afraid to give that kind of a feedback to the CEO or the person in charge.
Yeah.
So if done delicately in the right way, I have found that kind of feedback to be transformative for me when I receive it. So thank you, Harrison, for that great answer. By the way, for those who were interested in the Game of Thrones character that Harrison mentioned, it's Lyanna Mormont. So in case you want to watch YouTube clips of her, dominating everybody around her in a very powerful way. Great character. All right, we're going to go next to Michael. Michael, if you could unmute yourself and ask the question, please.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yep.
Sure. I was just going to ask about being in the meeting setting and getting a question, and you're trying to answer the question, but you need to think about it a little bit, so you don't want to ramble on. How do you suggest, what kind of method could you use in answering that kind of question in that kind of situation?
I think it's a good idea not to ramble, and not jumping to an answer and thinking that you're gonna, that you're gonna catch your flow, because people immediately, especially again, the higher level the meeting, the more sensitive people are to fluff and nonsense. So if you need a second, right? If somebody asks you a question, it's okay to just kind of look off into the distance for a moment, right? Both for effect as well as to really gather your thoughts, to say, how do I answer that? And not feel the pressure to jump immediately to an answer. Because when you think about it, confident leaders, they don't feel the need to rush to an answer. In fact, they more feel the need to, let me give a substantive answer to this. Now, of course, if the clock is ticking and everybody's sitting there watching you for about 10 seconds, either you're a drama queen, or you really are just having trouble coming up, with that kind of response. But listen, to take a couple of, sometimes it doesn't take more than 2 or 3 seconds to just kind of think about, how do I answer this? And it can have a very solid effect of you not feeling the need to please by jumping to an answer and then, finding your way to the substance of it.
Okay. Thank you. That works.
All right.
You said a phrase there, Harrison, that I want to kind of get against. So in that moment, you mentioned something there about, hold on a moment, let me think about this, but is there a smooth way to because sometimes silence can be powerful, sometimes it can be very awkward if somebody seems like they're lost. So anything to say to make that transition smoother?
So you mean you hear the question, are you?
And I don't know what to say.
Yeah.
But I need to think about it, but I want to say something better than I need to think about this. Is there a good way to?
To be honest with you, I mean, I don't think there's a right and a totally wrong way, but I would just say nothing for 2 or 3 seconds and really just think about it. But let people see that I'm thinking about it.
Right.
Right? I mean, in interviews, somebody asks me a question, I want to make sure I'm giving them a good answer. I might just pause for a second and I might look to the side and then I go, the best way to probably describe this. It was clear that I just really thought about how best to give you value. So you don't have to announce it at all. You don't have to say, I need 4 seconds. So let's see. And then filling the air, the space with, let's see, how do I, no, just say nothing.
Okay.
It's powerful.
Okay. Love it. Thank you, Harrison. Thank you, Michael. I'm going to go ahead and combine the remaining questions so that we finish right on time. So Harrison, we had 2 questions. One person who really asked about, if they're just like, how can they best beat their fear of public speaking, which obviously countless books have been written on that subject, but your quick take on that. And then related to that, what advice would you give to someone who is naturally more quiet to be more assertive? I know they're not the same question, but a little bit about like people who are not necessarily comfortable with whether it's public speaking or being assertive, how to get into the zone, because oftentimes it's not optional. Sometimes you have to be assertive and you have to speak publicly. So what's your advice for those 2 situations?
So how do you get more comfortable public speaking? I was very, very shy in college. I didn't have an easy time public speaking. I was more introverted, definitely shy. And once I realized that I cannot accomplish goals in my life that I want to accomplish, I realized I needed to make a switch. For me, the switch was taking the focus completely off myself. Because one of the reasons why we fear public speaking is because part of our focus, if not all of it, is on us, is on how awkward I might look, pimples, does my jacket fit right, what do they think of me, am I prepared well enough, all these things that are going through your mind right now take you out of the moment and make you basically seem less than confident and having a much harder time. But the moment you switch and focus on just the value, what value can I give to the people in front of me, and really focus hard on that, guess what you can't do? Focus on yourself. You cannot focus on 2 things at the same time. It is impossible. You can switch back and forth, but you cannot focus on more than one thing at a time. So by focusing on giving you value, all of a sudden I can no longer focus on my awkwardness, right? Because hopefully I picked out the right suit, I know my stuff, I've prepared. It's too late to worry about that, So that's one thing, really focus on the value of something. And then how can quiet people be more assertive and be more engaged? Listen, I had a client not too long ago who was being groomed for a senior level role, global role, but some of the feedback about him was he wasn't engaged enough in meetings, right? He was hanging back. And when I asked him about that, I said, they don't see you as a leader in the meetings. Why? He said, well, people are talking a lot, but they're not really saying anything. And I said, okay, why not say it first? Why not you be the one, that is making the statement first or second? But by knowing that you're creating a perception that you're disengaged and not interested, that's not helpful, right? So we created a quota where basically he had to speak up 3 times in, let's say, a 30-minute meeting, right? So literally like that. After a month, his boss called me up and said, hey, I don't know what you did with him, but he is engaged, he is, participating, he stands up for his ideas. And I'm thinking, I want to just tell you, we put on a sticky note 3 times, speak up 3 times, So it can be as simple as do the behavior so that other people can notice and say, oh yeah, he's contributing and he's speaking up. So yes, it may not feel natural. It may not be what you would normally do, but you know what? We do things all the time that we normally wouldn't do, right? Because it is appropriate for the situation, right? So I would say, figure out what's appropriate, then do it and get over that discomfort. And with time, it'll become even less uncomfortable.
Okay, love that, Harrison. This was extraordinarily valuable. You shared a number of things that I know will be pretty life and career changing for me, and I'm sure everybody else feels the same. So thank you so much. Just want to give you a quick opportunity at the very end to share. You've been incredibly generous with your time and insights. How can the Ivy community best support you? And what can they expect to find in this new version of the book that you've updated?
Yeah.
And any kind of like last parting word of wisdom for us to keep in mind.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun. So, I mean, the book it's Executive Presence, The Art of Commanding Respect Like a CEO. completely revised and updated with, you know, tons of case studies. Some of them I've shared with you, but many case studies of situations that you will face or are facing in your career at work, right? In order to be more effective with people, to be both the successful leader and the effective leader, to be part of that 10%, basically. You know, I would say spread the word, help other people be more effective, right? There are lots of people that are super smart, super, you know, just caring, and they contribute amazing value. And, you know, just because they don't naturally communicate in a more engaged way or in an extroverted way doesn't mean that they don't have value. So if you're a leader, if you're a manager, I would say help your team, you know, bring out the best in them. People that have a different communication style, figure out how to best, you know, make them feel part of the team, include them. And I think by learning some of the things that I have in the book, I think it can be very effective. My company is GuruMaker Executive Development. So if you go to GuruMaker.com, you'll see some of the services we offer. But I'm also available for, if anybody has any questions, feel free to contact me directly. I'd be very happy to, you know, to answer. I love talking about this stuff. I love helping people, which is why I do what I do. So.
Perfect. What's the best way for people to?
How about LinkedIn? I think LinkedIn would be a very easy and simple way. Connect with me on LinkedIn, and you know, you can message me on LinkedIn, and then we can you know, go back and forth.
Excellent. And I love what you just had to say, which was, you know, I think a lot of these skills can help really elevate our careers and our abilities. But the best impact it can have for us is actually helping us elevate the abilities of everyone we work with.
Yep.
And I think this book is a great one to buy for yourself to up-level yourself, but it's also a great one probably to gift to people to say, hey, maybe there's some stuff in here, and it's, you know, instead of trying to coach them through yourself without being an expert,
yep,
that do that for you. So thank you, Harrison. This was excellent. And thank you everybody for dialing in. All the best.